Good morning. Very much for your kind welcome and for the generosity that we've received here. It's a great honor to be here. Over 110 years ago, the Royal Geographical Society in London decided that women should be entitled to be elected as fellows on the same footing as men. In 1913, the admission of 163 women as fellows recognized them as serious contributors to geographical science. One of those women, elected in February 1913, was Gertrude Bell. By the autumn of that year, Gertrude Bell was in Damascus, about to embark on the journey she made to Nejd and Ha'il, home of the Al-Rashid family. Bell would be the first European to visit Ha'il for 20 years. Bell returned via Baghdad in early summer of 1914, arriving back in Britain shortly before the outbreak of World War I. To her, her journey through Arabia seems not to have been successful, but it proved subsequently to have been useful, not only for building her profile, but also the British involvement in the Middle East. Often it's asked whether she was there covertly, acting for the British government. Perhaps she was a spy. These are the questions people ask. So it's important that we look at the documents. Documents survive from that period, which help us. They help us to examine Bell's motives for visiting Ha'il, to appreciate the knowledge she gained through travel in Arabia, and to understand why that knowledge became useful to British authorities. The new context in which Gertrude Bell found herself afforded her new ways to contribute to the British establishment. So the records she created from that time, both personal and official, also help us to see how Gertrude Bell was able to act with increasing agency in a continually changing British context. Today I want to draw out the contrast between Bell's early motivations for her journey to Ha'il and the subsequent use of her knowledge, especially during World War I. What emerges is that in spite of her unofficial status, there's a gradual realization that she can be useful, and in fact that she had a unique role to play for those in Britain concerned with the Arab world during the First World War, and also for her own development. One of the points I want to make is that it was some 18 months after her return from Ha'il that Bell began working for the British. She was not immediately considered for intelligence work. Rather, her pre-war activities emerged as having a contribution to make as the war developed. Gertrude Bell was born in the northeast of England in 1868, and she died in Baghdad in Iraq in 1926. I'm just waiting for this. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you so much. So you see the red dot is Newcastle in England. This was close to where she was born in Washington. Newcastle's the home of Newcastle University, where I'm from. It's also, for those who like football, the home of Newcastle United, closely linked now to Saudi Arabia. And it's also the home of the Gertrude Bell Archive. So a few months after her death, Gertrude's half-sister, Elsa Richmond, donated her personal letters, diaries, books, and some 8,000 photographs to what is now Newcastle University. Then it was Armstrong College, this building that you can see here, which is the home of history, classics, and archaeology, where I'm based, just a few hundred meters away from Newcastle United's stadium, St James's Park. We can hear the roars if they're playing while we're teaching. What I'd like to do today first is to say how delighted we would be if you would like to come and visit us in Newcastle, perhaps to come and visit the Gertrude Bell Archive, perhaps come and do some research with us, perhaps study with us. If you're unable to do that, then you can visit the Gertrude Bell Archive online via the Gertrude Bell Archive website. And there we've digitized over 10,000 items, photographs, letters and diaries, which you can find online. And I'm going to show you some of that material today, as well as some of the material from the Royal Geographical Society. This bust is a bust of Gertrude Bell from the Royal Geographical Society. The Gertrude Bell Archive at Newcastle has been inscribed as an international memory of the world because of its recognition of its importance in terms of time, place, and people that it preserves. Gertrude Bell had hoped to visit Arabia before 1913. Percy Cox records that she asked him for advice about visiting Ha'il in 1909. He advised her against the route from the Persian Gulf, and that year she travelled to Mesopotamia instead, and then again in 1911. But in November 1913, Gertrude Bell left Damascus with a small group of men and camels. She took the route shown in the red on the map in red, returning from Ha'il via Baghdad and Damascus. Her first aim on her journey from Damascus to Nejd was to record the early Islamic period buildings found along the way. So in the north, she visited places like Qaza Amra and Qaza Karana. As well as making a map of her route, she hoped to record the location of other archaeological sites as yet undiscovered by Europeans. On all her other journeys in the wider region since 1899, Bell had also recorded information about the people she met and the places she visited. These were descriptions and photographs which informed her travel narratives. And these journeys were funded by her family. Her travel books were aimed primarily at a popular audience. So books like Desert and the Sown, published in 1907, Amurath to Amurath, published in 1911, as well as her archaeological studies. And her prime aim for traveling was to conduct archaeological fieldwork, particularly recording standing buildings. Her journal articles and archaeological books were written for an academic audience. They're illustrated with maps and photographs and plans, and you can see on the right-hand side a republication of Gertrude Bell's 1001 Churches, which was originally published in 1909, and she also published an important book study of Ukhaidir in Iraq in 1914. Now, we have no indication that her journey to Ha'il was to be any different in its aims. In 1913, Gertrude was also made a fellow as well as being made a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, she was also awarded the Gill Memorial Prize for her many years of exploration in the geography, the archaeology of Syria, Mesopotamia, Turkey, and Asia. So at that time in her life, the opportunity to travel to Arabia presented a really exciting new area for her to research. Gertrude Bell's field notes and 2 diaries record her journey to Ha'il. One of them was kept for Dick Doughty Wiley, the man who she'd fallen in love with, and who was, in fact, a relative of Charles Doughty, the author of Arabia Deserta. The theodolite that you can see on the screen was presented to her by the Royal Geographical Society, and it was this instrument that she used to make her map when she was traveling to Ha'il. One of the things I think is particularly important is this letter here, which she writes to her father. There have been questions about whether Bell was working for the British government when she travelled to Arabia. But this letter Gertrude wrote to her father on the 29th of November 1913 makes clear that this journey was at her own initiative and was to be paid for by her family. Or so her father discovered when she informed him in this telegram. She says, "Dearest father, I sent you a telegram which I fear will rather surprise you, asking you to make the National Bank telegraph £400 to my credit through the Ottoman Bank London to the Ottoman Bank here." Itemizing her costs in great detail, she explained that she would be asking for all of next year's allowance. We also see that she didn't have official permission. On the 16th of January 1914, Bell records that she was detained by the Ottoman authorities at Ziza and wrote in her private diary for Dick Doughty-Wylie, "Louis Mallet, the British ambassador in Constantinople, has informed me that if I go on towards Nejd, my own government washes its hands of me. And I have given a categorical acquittal to the Ottoman government, saying that I go at my own risk." So having assured the Ottoman authorities, she was released from their arrest at Ziza. So clearly she was traveling independently, funded by her family, and also without the support of major authorities as she was leaving. On the following slides, what I've done is taken a small extract of the map that she made, and I've put that at top left, and then I've included some photographs that she took during the days when she was traveling through that part of the map. And you can look these up on the website if you're interested, along with further photographs as well. So here she is traveling at Jabal Tuwaik. This is a photograph of Muhammad al-Muhari and his wife at the encampment of Muhammad Abu Tayya. The next photographs are taken at Jabal Tuwaik, between Jabal Tubaik and Kabra Masawid. This is on the 30th and 31st of January 1914 through to the 4th of February. And then here photographs taken from Kabra Masawid to Nugrat al-Hamra and at Mugharawain. These are on the 4th to the 7th of February 1914. And then she travels through Wadi Nayal, and these are photographs taken by Gertrude Bell near Wadi Nayal, Muhammad ibn Eid of the Haywatat tribe and his people moving camp. So Bell met people, but she'd found very little in the way of archaeology. And she found the journey very demanding, physically and mentally. Overcome by a fit of severe depression, Bell confided in her diary for Dick Doughty-Wylie, "I'm beginning to wonder what profit I shall get out of it. A compass traverse across this country, over this country, which was more or less known. And a few names added to the map, names of stony mountains and barren plains and a couple of deep desert wells. For we have been watering at another today. And probably that is all." She went on, "I fear when I come to the end, I shall not look back and say, that was worth doing, but more likely I shall look back and say, it was a waste of time." She writes, "I wish something would happen, something exciting, a raid, a battle. And yet that's not my job either. What do ineffective archaeologists want with battles?" In other words, she sees herself as an ineffective archaeologist. She hasn't found any archaeological sites. She seems to have wasted her time, perhaps her money, and she seems to be achieving nothing useful. She's confiding this in her diary to the man she loves. This is her sort of innermost thoughts. She seems to think she should be playing a role to make a great impression through her presence. She writes, "I don't feel like the daughter of kings, which I'm supposed to be here." On the 19th of February, Gertrude Bell crossed the southeast angle of the Nefud, the first Westerner to do so, charting topographical features and watercourses. At Hazan, she wrote, "Hazan is a profound depression, surrounded by steep sandhills, and the well itself is very deep. And our well rope was 48 paces long. We found a number of Arabs watering their camels, the Anazi clan of the Awaji, who were camped near us. I watched and photographed, and they left me, though none had seen a European of any kind before." She records the topography, for example, between Jebel Mizma and Haman. I'm sorry, we've jumped along. There we are, we should be there. Mizma drops to the east in precipices of sandstone, weathered to a rusty black. At its feet are gathered endless companies of sandstone pinnacles, black too, shouldering one over the other, From here, she approached Hayil. Here we are. Gertrude Bell arrived at Hayil on the 25th of February 1914, where she spent 11 days. Before I left, I was given permission to photograph the town and the palace. I could see no trace of hostility on the part of the inhabitants. An amicable curiosity characterized our relations. At Hayil, she stayed in the summer palace of the Emir Mohammed of the Rashids. But there she encountered a problem. I brought with me a letter of credit, £200 on the Rashids from their agent in Damascus. She says, Ibrahim refused to honor it in the absence of the Amir. And if I had not sold some camels, I should not have had enough money to get away. She concluded, since I have no money and I can do nothing but push on to Baghdad, but at least it's consoling to think that I could not this year have done more. I could not have gone south from here. The tribes are up and the road is barred. Ibn Saud has, so we hear, taken the Hazza and driven out the Turkish troops. So in October 1926, in the obituary he wrote for Gertrude Bell, D.G. Hogarth explained points made clearly in Bell's diaries. She'd planned to pass on into the dominions of Ibn Saud and to see the southern provinces, then unvisited. But this plan didn't suit her hosts. Therefore, even if Bell's intentions were exploration, the local people were conscious to mitigate any risk that she might have posed to them. And she was therefore obliged to return home, and she did that via Baghdad and then Damascus, finally returning via Constantinople, where she spent some time talking to the British ambassador Louis Mallard. That was in May 1914. Shortly after her return to England in July 1914, Bell published a 2-page report on her journey for the Royal Geographical Society. In that report, she noted the authority of the Rashid has diminished since 1893, when Baron Nold visited the Amir Mohammed. No European has been at Hayil since that date. In the interval, the star of Ibn Saud has been in the ascendant, and he is now, as far as I can judge, the chief figure in Central Arabia. Bell's impressions from that journey were thus the most recent information available to the British at a critical moment in world history. After her return, Bell was in discussions with the Royal Geographical Society about having a map prepared for her journey. This was something she would need for a lecture that they would like her to present, and that lecture was planned for November or December 1914. And it would be written up in the journal, the Geographical Journal, for which she'd already contributed an earlier paper on Euphrates. On the 29th of July 1914, Bell wrote to Kelty at the RGS to offer to come on Thursday, the 6th of August, and she was going to work with a draftsman on the maps. Less than a week later, the First World War broke out. So on the 4th of August, she wrote that she would not be coming to London. Oh, here we go. She would not be coming to London because of mobilization. And she says in the box up here, it looks as if maps of Arabia must give place to more pressing matters. So she sees the outbreak of war as more pressing than producing a map of her journey to Arabia. She next offered to visit the RGS on the 21st of September. Kelty's reply differentiates the draftsman work for the War Office and notes with reference to her maps that she'll need for her talk. We must keep the Society's work going. So we see that Kelty's making a distinction between what the draftsmen are doing for the War Office and the other work they do, which is for the Royal Geographical Society, which is where her maps come in. So at that time, they weren't seeing her map as useful for the War Office. After her first visit to the RGS, finally she made it on the 4th of November. She replies on the 6th, with regard to her lecture, Arabia can wait, can't it? She says she's got more pressing things to do, because on the 23rd of November, she left for Boulogne to serve in France, working with her friend Janet Hogarth, David's sister, for the Red Cross, where she was involved tracing the missing and the wounded. Still, the Royal Geographical Society were hoping they'd give her a lecture. Freshfield talks about that in the Geographical Journal at the end of 1914. But the fact that they let her go and work for the Red Cross, the fact that she was not doing that work on the maps and they weren't expecting her to do that, shows that at that point it wasn't really significant. Freshfield, the chairman of the Royal Geographical Society, notes that she and Shakespeare, however, had returned from Arabia, and he says, both with stories to tell of that fascinating, mysterious region now brought within the sphere of active politics. We hope to have the pleasure of listening to Miss Bell before Christmas. So clearly it seems to be an interesting thing for them to hear about, but perhaps not as important as it was going to become. On the 10th of April, 1915, Mr. Hinks from the Royal Geographical Society writes to Bell, who's in London, to ask if she'd deliver her paper. And she replies that she's working 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 7:30 in the evening, and she's working for the Wounded and the Missing Office, and she couldn't possibly give a lecture to the RGS. But she does say she's grateful to a Mr. Ashley, who's a map maker, who comes to help her to prepare her map for her lecture at one point. But she says, could she give some money to the Royal Geographical Society? So clearly she's still considering this to be her work that she's paying for. Then comes the change. And you see it here. Look, Arabia can wait, can't it? She's still thinking this is something that's not important at this moment. But then this is the change. This is the important bit. This is in August 1915. Bell writes to Hinks to inform him that she's received an article on Hayil from a man drawing up a gazetteer of Arabia for the India office, who were responsible for the British work in this part of the world. She says it's very good and needs a little amendment, but he has not yet got the latitude, the longitude, or the altitude. And I have no time to look up books. Could you send the particulars to him? So what she's saying is, and you can look at these online, that all her notes from her map making, the latitudes, the longitudes, they're all in her notebooks in the Royal Geographical Society. Could they please send her those send this man those details so that he can complete his work? So suddenly her work is becoming unique and it's becoming valuable. Mr. Hinks writes back to Bell to let her know that the Royal Geographical Society are working up her observations and those of Captain Shakespeare, and that he says, we may be able to finish the map of Arabia, which has been in hand for some time. So that's August 1915. So suddenly the map data has become recognized as important. Bell was called to Cairo in November 1915 by Hogarth to join others, including T.E. Lawrence, Gilbert Clayton, Mark Sykes, working for what was to become the Arab Bureau. She writes home, I'm helping Mr. Hogarth to fill in intelligence files with information as to tribes and sheikhs. Several other people in the office who are old friends are here. Mark Sykes, Captain Woolley, Mr. Lawrence. Oh, we're jumping around. Sorry. Oh, gosh, what's happening? Okay. So at this point in the work, Gertrude had done the work that Gertrude had done to record her journey to Hale, and the work that Shakespeare on his own journey had done, was taking on a new significance. It was at this point in the war that Bell's information was actively sought by the British. She went to Cairo, and she explains how she's working to fill in these I'm so sorry. In February 1916, the DGS president, D.G. Hogarth, Colonel Headley and others were discussing the preparation of a map of Europe and the Middle East. Recorded in the minutes, Hogarth explains that he hopes to take out the map being prepared of Arabia by the Royal Geographical Society to Cairo. The Cairo Intelligence Office intended to use the Royal Geographical Society map of Arabia for preparing their own map for the Admiralty Handbook in the War Office. So the map of Bell's travels was now taking on a new significance. Her work in Arabia and Mesopotamia now was well appreciated. Here you can see the minutes of that meeting, this special committee on maps. Hogarth says, we will say it's not the Admiralty, but the War Office. They merely want to use those sheets from the Royal Geographical Society map, which Gertrude Bell and Shakespeare have plotted. So they're going to take on that map for their own purposes. For her work for the Arab Bureau in Mesopotamia was well appreciated. Indeed, both she and Hogarth were proposed for the Royal Geographical Society for royal medals. Hogarth was the recipient of the medal in 1917. And then in early 1916, Bell went to Basra. She writes, home, I do know these people, the Arabs, in a way that's not possible for any official. In Mesopotamia, working under the India office for Percy Cox, it was important for Bell that she was useful, filling in maps and understanding. But she quips, none of these people from India know Arabic, and what that means in an intelligence department, I leave you to guess. But while the bar may have been low, Bell made herself indispensable in Mesopotamia. She continues to work on maps. She notes also, I do know these people, the Arabs. I've been in contact with them in a way that's impossible for no official, and it's that intimacy and friendship which makes me useful here now. Hogarth noted after Bell's death, but perhaps the most valuable result of that stage consists in the massive information that she accumulated about tribal elements, ranging from the Hejaz Railway on one flank to the Sirhan and the Nefud on the other. And he continues that Miss Bell became, from 1915 onwards, the interpreter of all the reports received from Central Arabia. The result of Gertrude Bell's journey to Hale was to be much greater than she had originally imagined. Her aspiration to map unexplored landscapes and to locate and describe archaeological sites left her largely unfulfilled, but the resulting war meant that the information she gained gave her an influence beyond that usually attributed to those of her status and gender. Her new identity gave her increasing agency in British context. This was an identity that she actively sought. The more official records lend credence to the view that Bell, although not supported by British authorities on her initial journey, did collect information that was subsequently to be of considerable significance during the war. This information did not only provide British with intelligence of use during the First World War, but also provided Bell with knowledge that she was able to exploit actively to her own benefit, initially in Cairo, but subsequently more particularly in Mesopotamia, following the Cairo Conference in 1921. This influence can be traced back to her journeys as an independent, unofficial traveller before the tumultuous events of World War I. Thank you.
A heartfelt thank you to Dr. Professor Mark for delivering such a thought-provoking lecture. To the audience, does anyone have any question
Well, thank you.
they would
I'm
like
sorry
to
about
ask
the
Professor
slides.
Mark? Yes.
Oh, it's a question.
Yes, I'm David Awad from Lebanese American University. Thank you for a fascinating presentation and amazing storytelling as well. My question is not a question, it's like wondering what drives a woman like Gertrude Bell to tackle on a journey like that in 1913? It sounds completely unreal and surreal. Anything in her notes, in her journals that shows the initial objectives or intention to do that?
It's a really interesting question. She goes from being something like a traveler in 1899 when she visits Jerusalem for about 7 months to becoming much more consciously an archaeologist over the next 15 years. She writes about becoming a person. I think she wants to be recognized as a person for something. Her archaeological work gives her an identity. She writes, and those popular writings are often dedicated to particular people. So she dedicates one of her books to Strigalski, The 1001 Churches. He's the foremost academic working in Turkey at the time on early medieval buildings. She dedicates her book Amurath to Lord Cromer. That's a more political book. The Turks at the time are rather unhappy with some of the things that she was writing. But there she's sort of seeking almost an affiliation with Lord Cromer, who, in fact, he was the chair of the anti-suffrage league, the people that didn't want women to have the vote in Britain, at the time when she dedicated her book to him. So she's kind of making allegiances with people. So I think one of the reasons she's doing this is for the thrill of it, and the thrill of discovery, which was why she was so upset when she hadn't found archaeological sites in Arabia. But I think also it's the recognition and the identity. This is the period of the heroic exploration. You know, Scott has just died trying to find the Antarctic. Shackleton's about to take his trip to the Antarctic. So this is the heroic age, if you like. And she was one of those people, and she was one of those first women, you know, given the Gill Memorial Prize in 1913, that year that all those 163 women became fellows for the first time. And a few months later, that same year, she's off to Arabia. You know, they don't know the war's going to break out. She's there to make a name for herself. So I think that's what's driving her. And because her father was this wealthy industrialist who'd made all his money in iron in the northeast of England, he could pay for it. He had the money to indulge her.
Thank you so much, Professor Mark. Thank you. Thank you.